Today, let's talk about how to practice non-resistance in our daily lives. I'm going to be sharing with you what I have found to work really well for me, what I have observed in my own experience regarding this theme of non-resistance. And I will also share with you some daily techniques that you can do, and we'll share with you certain examples, daily life examples that will make it very clear on how to implement this practice of non-resistance into the simplest aspect of your days and also the hardest problems of your life. So let's begin. Firstly, let's talk about what is non-resistance. Now, I'm going to break it down in three different ways. The first aspect of non-resistance is quite simple. It is learning to be in total allowance of the contents of this moment. So let's practice that together here and now. Currently, I'm sure the contents of your present moment are fairly neutral. You are sitting and watching this video. Perhaps there is some life circumstance that is not to your liking, but immediately, in your immediate circumstance, there's no danger to you, most likely. Everything is fairly neutral. So let's first start here. Here and now. Can you be in total allowance just for the moment? Forget about later, forget about before, forget about what this will turn into. Here and now, you learn to see this experience through the eyes of total acceptance. And what that means is just for now, you don't need anything to be different. It's like for a moment, we place down our desires and fears, our preferences and judgments. We are just looking at this experience and allowing it to be. Actually, it has already arisen. So it is already allowed to be from life. Now I come in and I start to judge and resist. Even though life has already allowed this experience to arise in this moment, I come in with my judgment. I say, well, I know what's better for me. I constantly filter this present moment through judgments, descriptions, interpretations, resistances. So, in a very simple way, non resistance, all that it is learning to look at this moment without any of those filters. Simply allowing what is just for this moment. When you allow yourself to practice this just one moment at a time, not worrying about how to translate over this over into the rest of your life or what this will lead to, because that's you constantly introducing a future into this moment. When you just practice this just for a moment, you start to glimpse this state of non-resistance, which is your default natural state. We start to taste the freedom in non-resistance. We'll talk about that in more detail later in the video. Let's get to the second component of non-resistance. Another way we can look at it is going with the flow of life. How many times has something happened to you and you notice your mind instantly rejecting it because it is considered a loss or it is considered a negative event? But how many times has that happened in our lives where the very negative event turns into something so positive later on? So you can see that the way we behave is very limited. The way that we are conditioned to react to circumstances is very limited in this particular point in time and space. Learning to take a step back from reaction and allowing the flow of life to take care of things on its own is the art that we are now learning with this practice of non-resistance. We do no longer react to every single thing that happens. Now we are learning to observe that the good contains the bad contains the good. So often the negative turns into our greatest blessing, and the positive often becomes our greatest problems and a great curse. For me, one of the hardest periods of my life was my spinal injury that devastated me for about 6 years, physically, mentally, emotionally. Yet that ended up turning into my greatest blessing also in time, because that is what allowed me to be receptive to the teachings of this spiritual path. So life is very much like that in all areas. Sometimes circumstances have to break down. Sometimes things have to give you the appearance of loss, personal loss, in order to make way for something new. So, one aspect of non resistance is learning to allow this flow of life and not riding this emotional roller coaster where if life is good, we are totally on a high. And if life is bad, then we are in the lowest of lows. Now we are learning to stay even through thick and thin, even minded through the highs and lows of life. Now, the last aspect of non resistance, and this is something not everybody's ready for, but I will mention it here in case you are. It is a subtler step on our spiritual journey where we surrender ourselves to God, to life, to the self. And we are no longer the primary responsible party for me and my life. Instead, we actually give over that control, we give over that responsibility to God, to life. This doesn't mean that we no longer act or do anything. We simply act and do everything with the understanding that it is life working through us, God acting through us, the self orchestrating our thinking, our speech, and our action. So we stay surrendered in a state of non resistance. That's all surrender really means. It is synonymous with non resistance. Understanding that it is life working through us, we do not judge its ways. Instead, we surrender to it. We learn to allow, we learn to accept, and we go through all the phases, the good and the bad, without resistance. Now that we have established what non resistance is, let's talk about how to practice it in daily life situations. The first thing that I would like to talk to you about is learn to see in whatever experience you are currently having. Notice how the mind is always reacting to it in the form of thought and emotion. So let's say someone makes a remark that you don't like, that you find insulting. Instantly, the moment the remark is made, some anger arises in the mind. Thoughts of anger, of how that person should not have said what they said, or thoughts wanting to actually hurt the other person or get revenge, an uncomfortable feeling of anger, maybe an increased heart rate. So, thought and emotion is always in a state of reaction to the circumstance. Someone cuts you off on the road while you're driving, the mind instantly reacts based on our conditioning, based on the nature of our personality. Some people are more reactive than others. Everybody is reactive to a certain degree, but people have different degrees and flavors to their conditioning. So, based on the flavor of that conditioning, the response comes very instantly without our doing it. It just happens, like you notice, like let's say you get into an argument with your partner or family member or friend, reactions just happen, responses just happen, triggers just happen. Now we are learning to observe those reactions rather than identifying with them. What does it mean to identify with them? It means to take those reactions to be what you are. And that is what we do on a normal basis. We take those mental and emotional impulses, and that's what they are because they're happening randomly. They're happening without our control. They're happening compulsively, unconsciously. On a regular day, we just identify with them. We take those mental narratives and points of view to be true, to be me and mine. And we take those emotions, those feelings to be me, to be mine. Now we are learning to observe. We are learning to objectify them. So let's say you get into an argument and you notice your mind getting riled up, your emotions getting turbulent. There's a greater degree of awareness, presence, where you're no longer just identified with those thoughts and you just spew out whatever they say or allow them to influence your action. Instead, you are the presence behind the thinking. from where you see the thinking. You are the presence behind the emotion, subtler than the emotion, prior to the emotion, from where you see the emotion. You can observe the emotion without identifying. You can observe the emotion without buying into it. You can observe the emotion even though it's unpleasant. You can observe the thought without believing in what it says. From here, a greater clarity dominates your action. A greater harmony acts through you. This is us going from a state of compulsive identification with reactiveness, with resistance, into our true nature of contentment, non judgmental awareness, undisturbed being. We start to discover our essential nature prior to the reactive mind. So we start to do this in small things and big. It's difficult to do it right away in big things because we sort of lose awareness. We just sort of totally are in a state of identification with the reactions that arise, the resistance that arises. So we start with small things. Start to practice this in small little inconveniences and annoying things that maybe the people around you do, or certain little problems that arise throughout the course of a day. And that equips us to be able to maintain that firm presence even when big things happen, which give you the appearance of a greater personal loss where resistance is so strong. Now, the second component of this is learning to observe how, your mind is not only reacting to circumstances, it is also just reacting to itself. So what happens is just a big pile of resistance. The mind not only resists what is happening, it literally starts to resist its own reactions to what is happening. For example, let's say someone said something that you don't like. The resistance to that is it arises in the form of anger. But because anger doesn't feel good, another layer of resistance arises. It's like a guilt or a suffering of the anger itself. So it's like, it's layers of resistance. But this is what we are now learning to observe. There's nothing fancy to do here, nothing for you to get rid of or change, but simply observe. Observe the layers of resistance and discover yourself as the awareness which is prior to them, subtler than them. It is from that place that you see those layers of resistance. That self, which is aware of resistance, that self that you are, that is aware of the resistance, is totally non resistant. It is in a state of utter acceptance. Your nature is acceptance. Awareness allows all things which it is aware of. Whatever has already arisen in this moment, there's already total allowance of. That is the nature of awareness. Now we are learning to discover that that is my true nature, my true state. Why should you practice non resistance? What are the benefits? When we talk about things personally, you can see that your resistance is always rooted in the desire to manipulate and control circumstances. We feel that if I resist, if I react, if I spring into some sort of affirmative action, try to grab the situation by the neck, that I'm doing something good for myself. But how often have you seen that it only leads to further dysfunction and disharmony? Well, that is the role of non resistance. Non resistance to the mind seems like passiveness. But when you begin to practice it, you will find that in the position of non resistance, there is true power. There is real control, which isn't a mental type of control. Instead, it is falling into harmony with the workings of all of life. It is a falling into alignment, relaxing away from resistance into alignment with the one intelligence which moves all things, which orchestrates all events, which is working through all beings. From here, you see that things have a way of working themselves out. In the position of non resistance, a power acts through you and does what needs to be done. There is always an appropriate response that arises to meet the demands of every situation. Now you start to even become more and more free from mind identification because you start to realize that I don't need to constantly think and react to what is happening in order to take care of life. My life doesn't fall apart if I stop resisting. My life doesn't fall apart if I let go of constantly thinking about what to do or how to control. In the absence of the desire to control, in total non resistance, in total allowance, we fall into alignment with that power, that one life, which rules all things and it acts through us. So, yes, in some situations, you may not get what you want, but life will go on the way that it needs to. You don't always know what's best for you. You know, the things sometimes you think are good for you, they end up becoming your greatest enemy. Things you think are bad for you end up becoming your greatest blessing. Understanding this wisdom, yes, situationally, you may not always get what you want, but you start to find that even when I don't get what I want, I am infinitely more peaceful, content, and happy. I need less and less. So that's what the beauty of non resistance is. You start to just need less and less conditions to satisfy you. You don't need constant conditions to be in the way you want them to be in order for you to be happy. The way of resistance is constant control, constant need for conditions to be the way I want them to be. But even when they are the way I want them to be, I'm still not satisfied. My gaze just turns to something else. The way of non resistance is helping us to discover our innate contentment, peacefulness, fullness. And lastly, if that's not enough, it also paves the way for spiritual growth. You cannot really grow spiritually if you are constantly resisting life, because in your resistance to life, you keep missing the lesson life is trying to teach you. In your resistance to life, your gaze continues to stay glued just to circumstances, and you miss the bigger picture. Non resistance helps you turn within, helps you discover your formless identity, helps you become one with your source. It paves the way for spiritual self knowledge. Without it, there's no spiritual growth. You can observe this for yourself in your day to day life. See for yourself. Resistance only creates misery for yourself and others. Non resistance brings harmony and happiness for yourself and others. So, not only is this the greatest work you can do for yourself, it is also the greatest gift you can offer to the world. So, now I just want to give you some practical tips for how to cultivate non resistance in your day to day life. The first thing I will ask you to do is learn to observe your mind, your thought and emotion, like the reactions that are coming up when your mind is fairly pleasant. The more you start to do this when your mind is pleasant, the more you'll be able to do it when the mind is unpleasant, because when it's unpleasant, it's very compelling. You instantly identify. So the way that I practice is even when the mind is pleasant and you're just going about your day, notice how the mind is always constantly commentating on things, reacting to things, not necessarily negatively, but it's always offering some sort of judgment, description, preference, resistance. So now learn to see these things and don't identify, meaning don't take them to be true. You know, right now you may be sitting here and a car may go by on the street outside of your house and it makes a loud sound, and instantly a thought arises and it says, "Oh my God, I hate the neighborhood I live in." You didn't even do anything to think that thought. You didn't choose that thought. That thought is not you or yours. It just It literally arises in your experience just like the sound that comes and goes. Why do we identify with it? Notice the moment you identify with it, you become so bothered, you become irritated. But like now you are learning your capacity to just observe these impulsive ideas that are arising without your choosing because they're just your conditioning. They arise, and now you're learning to not believe in them, not identify with them, not to see them as what you are. You're learning to discover yourself as the wordless presence, which is prior to the arising of these reactions. How beautiful. So start to observe this when the mind is pleasant. And then you become more and more capable to observe this when you are in the midst of a very difficult circumstance. Strive to practice this. Practice is key. No matter how many videos you watch on non resistance, no matter how many books you read on non resistance, they will not be of great help until you implement them. And so, also, I will say practicing in real time is very greatly facilitated if you also have a daily meditation practice. So, my recommendation to everybody, and this is something I do myself, is sit for meditation 2 times per day for 20 minutes each session, 20 to 30 minutes. You sit and you withdraw from the senses. You bring your attention inward to this sense of existence. I am. I have other videos on that, so I will link them in the description. That will help you because that's a whole different topic in and of itself. But meditation, daily meditation, it is what helps you cultivate this greater awareness so that you're able to live in non resistance throughout the day. Without it, it can be very difficult because you become very stuck. We become like, daily life is so sticky, it's so compelling. We get entangled in the web of mental reactions of our conditioning. So, daily meditation is of vital importance. If you resonate with that opinion, check out the video in the description box after this video and begin your practice today. Now, let's talk about overcoming challenges with this practice. You don't need to strive for perfection because you will forget this. You will react. You will identify. So, don't strive for perfection and don't feel guilty for reacting now that you have this information. Don't feel guilty for being in resistance now that you have this information. Put it to use. Apply it when you find yourself in resistance, when you find yourself reacting. Because feeling guilty for reacting is just another form of resistance to what is. So this practice starts where you find yourself, whether that is before, during, or after. In the very moment, come into total acceptance of what has happened, what currently is, and what may happen. Be free, free from resistance, free from judgment. Observe the reactions of the mind and don't identify. Totally surrender. Surrender yourself to life. Follow the flow. Of course, doing this is subtle and tricky and difficult, which is why it is very helpful to be connected with other people who are also doing the same practice. So if you're interested in connecting with others who are doing this and myself, join our free community. I will link it down below. Now, one last thing I will share with you is that there will be times where you will feel powerless to do this, or you may try it for a long time and you still feel like you're barely able to practice it. It's okay. Be kind to yourself, be easy with yourself, and know that you are not powerless. It is difficult in the beginning, especially the first few months that you practice this, it is difficult. But when you become willing, when you start to really see that resistance only creates suffering in your life and you start to become willing, no matter how hard it is, then that power will come to you. Life, God, self will make sure of that. So stay open, stay willing, regardless of how much you succeed or fail at this, you will learn the lessons you need to learn. Always remain open to that. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Join our community. I will just say it again in case this resonated with you and you want to get some resources for your practice and connect with other people, ask questions, share insights, all that good stuff. Thanks again for watching. I will see you next time.